Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Brent Bushy, and super excited today. We've got Kyle Reynolds, the superintendent in Woodward. Thanks for joining, Kyle.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brent.
Yeah. So, what we're going to talk about. I'm not sure if people are familiar with this thing. It's called distance learning. We're going to talk about we're nearing the end of this, the end of the school year, and this about 6-7 weeks of distance learning that most schools are doing in response to the COVID crisis and shutdown of schools. So we wanted to take an opportunity to talk about, how's it gone? What have we learned in terms of what's worked, what hasn't, and then look to the future a little bit. So Kyle, kind of give us an idea. How did you guys tackle this? You were given so much time to plan, and it was a really polite crisis, wasn't it?
It really was. I think we're pretty fortunate. And so just back up a little bit with my background. This is the only school I've ever worked for, and this is the community where I grew up. I came back and taught English for a few years and then transitioned into the IT director. And so I was the IT guy for 10 years. And, we worked really hard to develop a vision for how we could, change education and change our delivery and modernize. And, when you're the lowly tech director, you have a limited amount of authority. And so there was at times some frustration that I didn't feel like we were moving quite quick enough, maybe. And so anyway, I got eventually demoted to assistant principal at the high school. And that's my joke. It's an inside joke with a former superintendent here, and ended up 6 years ago, superintendent. So we worked really hard to modernize our operations, to move everything to the cloud that we can. It's better protected there. It's easier to manage. It gives us more flexibility with being able to do things on the fly and when you're away from your classroom or your office. We did my first year, we had just passed a bond issue. And so one of my first big purchase orders was $1 million of iPads. And so we've implemented over the years a one-to-one program that includes iPads in classrooms up to the 6th grade and Chromebooks in the hands of all of our students from 7th grade to 12th. And so when we hit the pandemic, we were really locked and loaded, had a lot of tools at our disposal, tools that we've used, maybe some that were underutilized. We have Google Classroom that was being used here and there. Another communications piece we'd implemented was School Status that allows the teachers to monitor, academic performance, but it also as a communications tool that became really valuable. The utilization on that piece went up like 400 or 500% just overnight, with parents reaching out to, or our teachers reaching out to parents, and vice versa with email and voice calls and text messages. So really proud of our staff for taking hold of those tools and the academic tools, the learning management system with the Google Classroom, the academic piece with Odysseyware. So they really just grabbed a hold of these things, and you saw it was overwhelming, because you saw teachers who maybe had been reluctant in the past to change from the methods that they'd used for years and years, and they just grabbed hold of the technology, and they reached out to their friends, their coworkers, their colleagues, and they leveraged the technology. So we've seen that across the board. We send home learning packets with elementary students, and yet you see high levels of participation with Google Hangouts, with kids connecting with their teachers, and just that personal relationship of being able to reach out and connect with others. So we've seen a lot of success, but then, the other side of that, when you tell a high school kid your grade is frozen as of March 12th,
you can find me on the river. Give me a fishing rod. I'm gone.
We're going to be honest with each other, because I'd have been that kid, probably A's and B's, and March 12th hit, and like, I can do but we've had engaged in kids that have gotten themselves across the finish line to finish credits and improve some of their grades. We have a little bit of a unique piece out here. We have a group of students that we call SALT, the Superintendent's Advisory and Leadership Team. Okay. And those are high school kids, grade 9 through 12. They apply every year, and we've modified the program over the last 2 or 3 years, but this year we'd worked with Joe Coles, and we really focused on what he calls the uncommon leadership, and just leadership characteristics, and how to interact with one another, how to care for others, how to be open and honest, how to listen, just, simple things. And we'd actually worked with 2 of our neighbor schools on that. And so we made a transition as we went into the pandemic and reached out to those kids to enable them and give them a framework to reach out to their cohorts, to reach out to their classmates, and quite simply just do check-ins to make sure their friends were doing well. So yeah, we've seen.
Hold on one sec here. I want to talk about that. I got a ton of questions for you, but Joe, okay. What's his last name?
Joe Coles.
Spell that if you don't mind.
He started with the Uncommon Athlete, and he ended up working with Rachel's Challenge up in Colorado, the Columbine, the first victim of the Columbine shooter, Rachel. So he's been really important to us.
Okay. Wow. I'm not familiar. Cool. Well, I'll put that in the show notes so that folks can find that.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? One of the things as I've done this podcast, one of the themes that comes out is some of the most innovative and sort of like, just kind of like, man, how'd you get that idea? One of the common themes is, we ask the kids, or we let the kids lead. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's right. It's an example of, one, how amazing our kids are when we actually give them the freedom to be that way. And number two, to me, it's a leadership lesson in humility, right? Like,
100%, yeah.
I mean, it's hard when I'm as smart and as intelligent as I am to let other people, do other stuff.
Right.
Facetiously, I think we forget, the most of the time, at least my experience, the best leaders are those that are humble enough to say, okay, let's let go of the reins a little bit. You still give some guidance, right? It's still leadership, but it's
absolutely
what we typically think. So what does it look like for kids to check in with kids, and how do you structure that so that it's safe and effective?
We really encourage them to use their school email accounts as much as possible. I think initially we discovered that wasn't really very effective because not all the kids were actively or consistently checking their school email, and so they ended up just on their own using text messages or social media platforms that they could. We actually provided them just a raw list of kids, their names, so that they could create their own kind of checklist to make sure they weren't leaving anybody out. But that over the 3 or 4 weeks that we did that, though, the problem was we were checking in with them on a Thursday morning, and we just started running out of kids. They weren't showing up anymore. And last week we quizzed them and said, what's the deal? And they said, everybody's working. Everybody's got stuff going on during the day.
Okay.
And so they're busy. They said, can we move it to the evening? The kids requested it. Because they said, I can't join at 10 o'clock in the morning. Can we move it to later in the day, like in the evening? So that's been interesting. And one of the reasons that we asked them to use their school email accounts, we have another piece that we put in a couple of years ago. And I just have to mention this because it's the top of my mind, and it's the Gaggle alert system. And if you're familiar with that, it's vendor specific, but they audit and monitor all of our student email accounts, all of their Google Drives. And so it looks for, obviously the inappropriate stuff and pictures and language and stuff like that, but it also flags statements of self-harm or harm to others. And, just today I got an alert, and it was an assignment that a student had done for one of our teachers. And the teacher prompted this writing assignment with, tell me about something about your life experiences. And the life experiences that this student related, from foster care system to abusive home. And it's startling. It is just startling. But we leverage that system when we see things like that to make sure that our counseling staff is on top of it, to make sure that student is well and their needs are being met. Not just physically, but emotionally.
It's so important, especially now, right? Because for a lot of kids, school is a safe place, right? And we forget, how, yeah, I mean, I think my kids, generally my kids have a pretty good environment, right? Like here in my house, but that's not the case, like we've created special learning environments for the kids, and, we're very fortunate to be able to do all of that, but a lot of people don't have that. And, now that they're stuck at home all day, that's awful. Plus
Yeah, I mean, I
just
can go
depression
across.
in general, you know?
Yeah, I can go across the street, and my neighbors, a young couple, they have 5 kids, but mom is actually a certified teacher, not currently working, and so you can set a clock by them. I mean, when they come outside, it's recess for 15 minutes. They're very structured, but other parts of our community and all across the state, there are those, like you say, they're far less fortunate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's that type of software is critical anytime, right? Just for keeping kids safe and whatnot, but especially right now. I mean, I know I've been battling depression, right? Like I'm a power extrovert. I
Yeah.
have to schedule Zoom calls just so that I can see people.
Right. Right.
I have right before this, we have an office coffee on Wednesdays at 2:00, and they're like, what's the point of this? I'm like, I need to see you.
I'm lonely. Yeah.
I'm gonna hug the monitor. I mean, it's hard. Um, let me go back a little bit here. You said a lot of cool stuff so you did a lot of planning, right? Like, I think part of why you were able to respond was you could plan. You said you moved to the cloud as the IT director. I can pretend like I know technology. I worked in IT for a while, but I'm not a techie. So let's get a little nerdy here. When you said we moved to the cloud, define that.
Well, when I was IT director back in 2004, I was so proud. We passed a bond, and we were buying server equipment and putting in these 6-foot tall racks and heavy duty air conditioning, and I mean, it was just super cool. But over time, as that technology grew, we didn't have the staff to maintain it. You run out of backup space, and
Your
you know,
AC goes out and you fry your
oh,
servers. Yeah.
yeah, you get that alert that the AC went out. It's just a nightmare. So we gradually began to migrate those operations. So, our student information system, a teacher can access that on their phone. Our finance system through WinGauge, I can get a text and say, look, I've got a couple of POs that need to be approved, and I can do that wherever I am on my phone. So, the reliability, the uptime, it all just goes sky high. So then, we've outfitted our teachers with MacBooks and Airs, and so they have those at home, their iPads. There's just really very little that they can't accomplish in their home environment, assuming that they've got, halfway decent, reliable internet. And that's the other really stark contrast that we've found. I know everybody's found it across the state. The numbers of students and staff that don't have access to the internet or reliable internet.
Yeah, the staff part really blew my mind when schools started calling saying, "Hey, I need to get some hotspots for my teachers." I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
It's just wild. So, is it you Pioneer out there? Who's your main ISP?
We're fortunate to be one of the very first customers with OneNet at the school. So we've got
Okay.
super robust 5 gig internet, and great partnership with Suddenlink here in town with gigabit backbones between our buildings. But as far as the community goes, you can get AT&T, the old DSL or UVerse, whatever it's called, maybe 6 megs. The cable company Suddenlink offers 16 meg down, but that's one of those things right now with everybody at home with their kids and people working from home, that they pile on those neighborhood networks, and just causes a lot of issues. We have a couple of wireless providers that have come to town that are shooting line of sight. We've actually partnered with one of them. They're leasing. We've got monopoles, these big towers we used to use for wireless internet, the wide area network. Anyway, I don't know if you remember the company called Trillion. They weren't around very long. But anyway, these 80, 90-foot poles, and they're right now in the process of ramping up to hang their equipment on those poles on our schools all across town to make sure that they can increase the saturation levels. And they're offering discounted internet rates for students that we show to be on free and reduced lunch. So those kind of partnerships are going to it's going to have to be even more robust than that moving forward.
And you've got Do hotspots work out there, or is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
we had actually last year we went with a company called Kajit,
Yep.
and they put mobile hotspots in our activity buses so that our kids could work when we were on trips. We have 5 charter buses that we use.
Okay.
And then we bought, I think, we purchased about 10 of the mobile hotspots that kids could check out. 2 days before spring break, we ordered 24 more. And so we've distributed all 34 of those out to students.
So on the buses, so Tulsa was doing this, and I just haven't heard back. I think some other schools may do it. They were sending buses out to neighborhoods where they knew there were a lot of kids without connectivity, and they had hotspots. And I said, I was afraid, I've used a hotspot personally in some areas,
Mhm.
and if I do anything heavy, I crash it. I figured you put 3 or 4 people on a hotspot, and it's just going to be slower and slow. Is that the case?
Well, yeah, and just imagine now we're not putting our buses in neighborhoods, but the hotspots that we send out, same thing. The plan that we had purchased for those hotspots assumes that the kid is using it evenings and weekends and
Yeah.
not all day, 7 days a week. And so they run out of data real quick. There might be 2 or 3 kids in the household, maybe mom's trying to get on. Even they're filtered, and so you can't really do social media and stuff. But we found out there were some real limitations, but then to bump those up to that unlimited data plan is costly. But
Yeah.
that's the reality. I mean, that's one of our planning things is we have got to get our hands on more hotspots, and we've got to be able to somehow fund the increased bandwidth that they're going to need.
Cool. I can send you a few contacts. I've been doing a lot of work on that. So,
Great.
but yeah, it's still hotspot, right? Like at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I would love to be able to see how we increased, real broadband access. You are right though. The schools. So when I moved here 6 years ago, one of my assumptions was that schools would have poor internet connectivity, and there were a few. But to my knowledge, most schools through OneNet have pretty darn good access now. But that has not been extended out. And I mean, I'm not techie enough to know if that's an option or what the cost would that be. But it feels like we've got to find a way to take advantage of that, that access in schools.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think Joy made a comment today that was spot on. We assume people have electricity and running water, and we should also assume that they have access to broadband.
Yep. I mean, in today's world, I don't think you can live without it. So.
Right.
Well, that's helpful. So, I mean, how many kids, did you know how many kids didn't have internet, or how did you assess that?
My principals at the high school and middle school did some polling of the kids and right before spring break. And I don't know that the kids understood what was coming. I don't know that and so you had some that didn't really have a robust access to the internet, but they may have responded that they were good. And once the dynamic changed, the requests started coming in, and it didn't take very long for those other 24 to be spoken for.
Wow. Yeah. And you still have kids that don't have internet? I would assume so.
I'm certain that we do. And like I said, you've got those kids that have the hot spots, and it doesn't take very long for them to burn through the however many gigabyte worth of data they're allowed on them. So
yeah,
it's just inadequate. It's very inadequate.
Yeah. Oh, that's frustrating. I know there's lots of talk about finding solutions. Hopefully we can figure that out.
Yeah.
So for an LMS, then you guys have been using Google Classroom.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just it's an integration piece. I mean, the Hangout, it's just so easy to use, and it's free.
Yep. Yeah. It's tough to beat the budget. It does. I mean, when you look at Canvas or other LMSs, it's nice, but
right.
Yeah, especially given the time frame that we had, there was really nothing else. All right. So, are you guys done this week? You're going next week? When's your last day?
We're done Friday. Yeah, we're wrapping up Friday. We've got awards things that are being posted and done virtually or through Facebook or YouTube. Another really cool area we've excelled at, and I'm really proud of, is our Boomer TV guys. They've spent the last couple of years ramping up their ability to stream and do some really creative stuff with graphics and Man, those guys
These
work really.
kids?
Well, right now it's just the two teachers that I have. They don't have access to kids helping them right now, but
Okay.
the Golden W it's a banquet, and they put together a video that's really respectful and tastefully done. They're working on the senior salute video for graduation, and working with the ecumenical faith community to do baccalaureate this Sunday. So they've just done a tremendous job.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so school ends on Friday, baccalaureate Sunday. Are you going to do a graduation ceremony?
Yeah, what we're gonna do is we wanted to make sure that we were respectful and marking that May 17th day that we'd set aside for graduation. So at 3 p.m. we will have our senior celebration video that goes out. There will be a speech in there embedded from Senator Langford, who was originally scheduled to be our graduation speaker.
Okay.
And that'll be a salute to recognize the valedictorians, salutatorians, the accomplishments of that class, and be able to showcase each and every student. And then as we move forward, we've got June 21st and July 19th reserved for in-person graduation. You just can't do it now. I mean, that's 3,000 people in a gymnasium. That's not going to happen under the current restrictions. So hopefully when we get into June or even July, we can pull that off and make it a special day for the kids and their parents.
So then what happens after the 17th? What's your plans?
We start summer school.
Okay.
In fact, I believe we start summer school on the 11th, next Monday. And so that's virtual. We're on the 21st Century Community Learning Grant. So summer school is not an option. And so they've been working for weeks to, come up with things that we can do over distance learning. Don't feel like it's the right thing to do to bring kids back into the schools yet. But sending home learning packets, connecting over Google Hangouts, things like that. And of course, at the high school level, we'll have credit recovery and opportunities for kids to either catch up or work ahead even.
Is that they're going to be using Odyssey Ware?
Yeah.
Okay. How many kids, like what percentage of your kids are in the summer school?
I have not seen enrollment numbers. I'd expect, at the high school level, we may have 10 or 20 kids working on credit recovery or accelerating. I'd expect some pretty good numbers from our elementaries. I don't have any pre-sign up numbers with me right now, but I'm
Sure.
guessing we'll have good participation though.
Cool.
And feeding. We didn't even talk about feeding.
I know. Yeah.
We've started with that. I mean, I think everybody's step one, we got to feed kids. I just looked up our numbers. We have served 42,558 meals.
My God.
And that just blows me away. And I don't know that's 13 to 1,500 a day meals that we're putting out there on top of the backpacks. And we send home backpacks over the weekend, and we just got through doing a little fundraiser and ended up with, I think, $13,000 or $14,000 in donations to make sure that we could continue to provide backpack food on weekends the rest of the summer. So it's phenomenal that we've been able to step up and accomplish that. That's huge.
So your summer food program, will you run it out of the schools? You're going to do anything in sort of a remote fashion?
We're going to do exactly what we've been doing the last 6 weeks is we prepare everything out of a central cafeteria at the middle school, and then we send out route buses to 9 different locations around town. Most of them are schools, a couple of 2 or 3 pretty big apartment complexes, and they may or may not make a pass through a trailer park or somewhere on the way back, if they have a few left over, to make sure they give those out. So the pivot point happens in June. In June, I don't have the staff working at the transportation department that I have right now. So again, the Ministerial Alliance stepped up. We have a planning meeting, I think, tomorrow. They're going to step in and divvy up, and certain churches will take certain days and bring their church van and pick up the meals and take them out and help us distribute them. So they're just chomping at the bit. They can't wait to help.
That's so cool. I mean, I've heard, I mean, it's hard to tell, right? When you're home all the time and, if you get on Twitter, you think the world's ending always, right?
Right.
But, you hear these stories of people pitching in, and that's, I don't know, that provides some wind at my back at least. So.
Absolutely.
Um, okay, so I want to talk about what can we learn from this. We probably need to talk about like what the heck are you going to do in the fall, which I'm sure you have all solved and figured out at this point. Right?
Yeah, not quite. Well, you and I are both on Superintendent Hoffmeister's the working group for recovery and getting back into school in the fall. And I think right now it's about contingency planning. I mean,
Yeah.
it's we just have to have some what if scenarios, and I've seen some really solid documents just in the last 24 hours that people like April Grace and Don Raleigh have helped create. A friend of mine down the road at Alva, Tim Argo, shot me a document that he'd started working on, and it's solid. It's just a great document to go through, and if this happens, then this is what we do. Here's the number you call, here's our communications plan. And I think that's the most unsettling thing. We talked about this with our OASA leadership earlier. I referenced this book, Hope Rising. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Actually, I am not.
Okay, Hope Rising, Casey Gwynn and Chen Hellman, they're in fact, an Oklahoma connection, but Hope Rising, I quoted this in my column that I sent to the newspaper today. Here's the key for this. And I think this is important for leaders, school leaders especially, to understand. Hope is the belief that your future can be brighter and better than your past, and that you actually have a role to play in making it better. Okay? So hope is an important part of our mental health, of just our general disposition, how we look at the world. And right now, we don't know what the future looks like. And so our leaders have to at least be able to say, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we have some plans. And here's our plans. Here's some contingency plans, so we all kind of know how we're going to react to this when it happens.
Oh, that's cool. You reminded me of I've read a book. World War I fascinates me. Just how they kept on fighting it. If you've ever read The Trench Warfare, it's just insane.
Yeah.
And I read a book on the Battle of Vimy Ridge. One of my friends in D.C. was Canadian, and the Canadians, this was one of the big battles that they fought in. So it was a book that was like national pride, and he shared it with me. And there was this section where there was an officer talking to his men the night before the battle, and he said, "Look, you're going to find yourself in no man's land. We've trained and planned this attack, but there's no accounting for when the bullets start flying and the bombs start going off, and you'll be in no man's land, stuck with in a crater. And the only option you have, if you want to be successful, is you keep marching forward. Period."
Right.
I'm not doing the quote justice. I read it, was so fired up. I went to my computer, printed it up, typed it up, and put it on my wall in my office, because it was just like, this is serious stuff, man. So yeah, I need to hear that, because I am not doing well with this uncertain future. If you told me, hey, we got till Christmas and then we'll have a vaccine, rock and roll, right? Like, let's go. But you just don't know. It is unsettling to not know what that future is.
Well, you really need to. In fact, we're doing a book study, an online book study on this Hope Rising, and I mean it's the science of hope. Okay, and one of the great stories at the very beginning of the book talks about this lady that had a heart attack, and she made it to the hospital, collapsed outside the ER, and it was the Widowmaker. I mean, she's gone for all intensive purposes. They did chest compressions and then put the machine on that does the automatic chest compressions. And a cardiologist that was there had developed this innovative technique of extracorporeal something bypass. And they hooked this thing up to her and basically did a heart-lung bypass and pumping oxygen into her blood, externally. And it worked, and they saved her life. And so that's become, at that hospital, a part of their emergency department procedures. And so their survival rate for heart attacks went from the national average of 8% to like 26%. So it's huge. And then they discovered something really unique. They discovered that not only was that even if you took out those scenarios where they used that special procedure, their normal survival rate had gone up to 26% because it created a culture of hope.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that.
That's awesome. I mean, were you a coach? I was a coach.
Nope. I was the band geek and
Can you be a superintendent in Oklahoma if you weren't a coach?
The rare occasion.
They must have a special room for you at some of the meetings.
I did coach the academic team for a couple of years, so maybe that counts. I don't know.
One of the quotes the two different quotes I always or not, it was really statistics that I pointed out was you couldn't break the 4-minute mile, and Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, and that next year I think 13 or 14 people broke the 4-minute mile.
Right.
It's that mentality. What was the other one? It was something to do with the Russian pole vaulter. He broke, you couldn't clear 20 feet, and then he cleared it 16 or 17 times. It's like, come on, he's not that much better than the other ones. He just has got the belief, So
right.
So yeah, I don't know. Okay, Hope Rising. I got to check it out. So
yep, they'll actually be. I think Chan Hellman will be at the COSA conference, the virtual conference in June.
Okay, cool. First week in June. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about post-COVID, right? Hopefully sooner rather than later. We don't know when. What can we learn from this? How can we get better from this, right? Like you can't beat the optimism out of me, so I've got to go to that. Like, what are the lessons learned? What are the ways that we can use this to really transform stuff?
No, I think you're right on. I think 100% that this should be a watershed moment for us in education. I mean, we stepped out this year with the virtual and blended learning environments, and I can see that those numbers will likely balloon in the future. I think they'll go up initially because some parents will be reluctant to send their kids to school, even if we feel like we're in the clear. But even more importantly, I think once we get past this, we've learned the technology that now maybe we're not as scared of it. Can we look more at flipping our classrooms where, we deliver the content over the LMS and the kids can watch the lecture, pause it, take notes, and then the teacher is working more one-on-one, face-to-face in small groups in the classroom in a more meaningful way. I saw a great testimonial years ago from a guy that down in Austin, Texas, flipped his classroom reluctantly. They paid him to do it. And so he did this, and he's delivering instruction, through I think it was through iTunes or Apple Classroom, whatever. And he said the crazy thing, he says, I learned that I had a much better relationship with all of my students because suddenly I never had my back to them at the front of the room. I was working with them face to face. I got to know them better. It was more meaningful being able to work with them. So I think there's some great technology lessons that we can leverage from here out because we have a real responsibility to provide our students with a meaningful 21st century education. I mean, it's not 1980. When I went to school, there was a little lab of a half a dozen TRS-80, the Trash 80 computers, and
that was cutting edge, man.
I know it was a big deal at the time to do that coding to make the lines go around the screen, right? But I've taught here. I've worked in this district for 25 years. 1995 is when I started, and I've used a computer every single day for my job. And that's why we got away from those labs. I said, why would we, think a kid's going to feel special if they get to go to the computer lab once or twice a week? I mean, that's ridiculous. It should be a tool like their pencils and notebooks.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm son of a choir director, 37 years in Flint, Michigan. And one of my biases about teachers, probably not, it's not fair, but, I watched my dad. My dad loved his job. He's grandpa now. He loves that too. But he was just super passionate. And one of the things about choir, and so I've got a bias, I think ag teachers, I think they make really good administrators because they've always done things differently, right? They're constantly
Mm-hmm.
reiterating. Versus, I think a lot of really solid, your standard subject teachers can be really effective in one matter, and then I'd probably do the same thing. They kind of teach the same way, right? That's an unfair characteristic. I know that the great teachers are really iterating a lot, but I think there's a lot of really solid teachers that they haven't changed much, right? Because they don't really need to.
Well, sure.
And I think this situation definitely challenged those teachers more than the others, right? Because especially technology, a lot of those teachers were intimidated, especially at the start, and it forced them out of that mold of what they know works. So I hope we can take some of that. I also think it's hard to change in school because we all sat in the same math class, right? Like
Right.
we all know we're all experts because we all took it, right? So we know what math looks like, we know what English looks like, except now we know that it can look different because we've all been forced into this situation. So
And
that's
I mean, in big ways, Brent. I mean, we know that our system was modeled after this factory model progression of everyone goes at the same pace. And we know that kids don't develop and grow at the same pace. And yet we continue to do this. And so, I'm looking forward to at some point, we've got to get out of our own way. I talked to another superintendent this year and I had a real concern about virtual learning and about kids accelerating their learning and graduating early. And I said, why not? If they're ready for that, why are you holding them back? Well, it costs me money. Well, that's what's best for the kid. If it's good for that kid to accelerate and be done, give them the opportunity.
Yeah. Or just, I mean, so there's definitely like that. We all develop at different paces, right? I think the other thing and this is personal for me, my kids are, my oldest is Downs, she's 12, and my youngest turns 10 in July. We are extraordinarily lucky. My wife has a doctorate in education. She's a great teacher, so she's and she's free right now to really kind of serve as the maestro. We have 2 sets of grandparents and another great uncle that are all teaching classes to our kids remotely. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty awesome. I sit here in this office. I hear my dad teaching piano. I hear my mom teaching guitar. I hear my father-in-law doing social studies. I mean, it's fun. But every 2 weeks we do a COVID concert. This was the girls' idea. And so Friday is our third COVID concert. The first one, so my daughter with Downs struggles with academics, as you would expect. She has had a huge stuttering problem and has been a pre-emergent reader. And we've been working really hard. Our teacher's been working really hard. But whatever the case is, I think the music coupled, my mom has worked really hard with this, and my wife, as well as her teacher. All of a sudden, the stuttering's gone, and she stood up and read at the first concert. I'm sitting on a Friday night, 6:00, like, oh great, I get to see a kid's show. I started crying.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe it. And then so they did some music, and then my youngest had written a speech to end the show. And she got up and the show is, 4 grandparents sitting on iPads watching, right? And my wife and I, right? Like, it's not a big, but she got up and did the speech, and I was like, wow, her delivery was fantastic, but I thought my wife had written it. It was that well written. And I turned to my wife and I said, how long did you work with her on that speech? And she said, that's the first time I heard the speech too.
Oh my.
And it was just, it's like, whoa, like if we have the right structure now, if you can get a 6-to-1 adult ratio to kids, like you can do, so obviously some of the stuff can't be recreated, but the lesson learned to me was if you can give kids the freedom and the structure they need, they can grow in ways that we can't even imagine. I mean, this is the speech that a high school kid would have delivered, right? And I would have told you, put a gun to my head that night. It's like, no, Maddie can't read. There's no way. And she got right up, took her thing up, and didn't stutter a bit, and read right off the page. I mean, just tears coming down my face. So it's that kind of the lessons that I really hope we can find a way to harness. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy as heck, so I hope folks find out. We'll get this posted, and make sure to. I'm going to make sure to cite all the stuff that you cited to get some cool resources. But
Yeah.
thanks a lot for your time and for your service.
I appreciate you having me. I really enjoyed the visit.
Definitely.